I found out on a Thursday. Not because she told me, not because she forgot, but because a stranger's comment floated onto my screen and shattered 12 years of friendship in a single breath. Congratulations, Stella. You deserve everything. The photo loaded slowly, like the universe wanted me to feel every second of the betrayal. Stella, in her black graduation gown, holding her degree with both hands, smiling the smile she used to reserve for me. Her parents stood beside her, her cousin Mia, a few classmates I recognized. And then my eyes searched, almost desperately, for the one person who should have been there with her, me. I don't know what hurt more, the fact that she didn't invite me, or the realization that she didn't even think I'd notice. My name is Amelia Hartley. I'm 28 years old, an administrative assistant in a small community healthcare office, and for most of my adult life, I believed Stella Rowan was my anchor, my confidant, my chosen family. And in one still photograph, I learned I'd been edited out of her life long before I realized. I stared at that post for a long time. Long enough for the screen to dim, long enough for the weight in my chest to settle into something sharp, long enough to understand that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't life drifting or schedules clashing or the universe pulling us apart. It was intentional. 12 years of friendship, reduced to a cropped-out moment. I remember whispering to myself, not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly, in disbelief. Why didn't she want me there? No answer came. Not then. But grief has a strange way of clearing the fog. In the silence that followed, I began replaying memories, hearing tones I had ignored, noticing patterns I had excused. A knot formed in my stomach, one tied years ago, and for the first time, I began pulling on the thread. This is the story of how a single photo cracked open a truth I had been too loyal, too hopeful, too forgiving to see. It's the story of how that truth reshaped me, slowly, painfully, then beautifully. But first, this is the moment everything changed. Before we go further, here at Revenge Bible, we explore real psychological stories of betrayal and justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our next emotional reckoning. People often assume betrayals begin with a single moment, a sharp snap that breaks everything at once. But I've learned they start quieter than that. They begin in the background, in the soft spaces of everyday life, where trust grows, where loyalty settles, where routines feel safe. Before Stella's graduation post rewired my world, our friendship was woven into the fabric of my ordinary days, a constant presence I never questioned. I met Stella 12 years ago during my second week working at a local cafe while juggling evening classes. She breezed in one morning with a messy bun, a stack of textbooks, and the kind of confident ease I envied. I accidentally spilled coffee on her notebook, and she just laughed, waving it off like it didn't matter. "Relax," she said. "It's only my ego that's bruised." Then she grinned, and something about her warmth felt like sunlight. That was how it started. Over the years, we built a friendship that felt almost ritualistic. Sunday brunches, late-night rants, long walks after bad dates, small gifts left on each other's doorsteps. I always thought of Stella as the more radiant one, the one people gravitated toward. I never resented that. If anything, I admired it. I thought she admired my steadiness in return. I believed our strengths balanced each other out. Back then, my life was simple in ways that felt grounding. I worked as an administrative assistant at a community healthcare center, a job mostly filled with scheduling appointments, sorting files, and answering patient questions with practiced patience. The work was not glamorous, but it mattered, and it gave me a kind of quiet pride. Every evening before bed, I wrote in my journal, a habit my mother taught me, to release thoughts, to unwind, to steady myself. Sometimes Stella would tease me for it, playfully imitating a dramatic diary entry. I would laugh it off. I thought that was just her humor. She was studying part-time for her psychology degree, a dream she spoke of with equal parts determination and self-doubt. I supported her through stressful semesters, exhausting group projects, the nights she said she wasn't good enough. I believed in her even when she didn't. I told her she would cross that graduation stage one day, and I meant it. Our friendship wasn't perfect, but I never questioned its foundation. I was the listener, she was the storyteller. I was the planner, she was the improviser. I was the one who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, the small details. And she was the one who swept into a room and made strangers feel like old friends. It worked, until it didn't. Looking back, I see moments I dismissed far too easily. Times she'd cancel on me last minute because something better came up. Times she'd make small jokes about my job being cute or call my routines boring. None of it felt malicious then, just mismatched love languages, or so I thought. Her mother, Diane, had always been subtly cold toward me, in a polite, detached way that felt intentional. She'd ask Stella about her more ambitious friends, or make comments like, "You need people who challenge you, not weigh you down." I used to think she simply didn't know me well enough to appreciate me. Now I wonder if she knew exactly what she was doing. Mia, Stella's cousin, wasn't any easier to navigate. She was competitive in the way people become when they're insecure but desperate not to look it. She'd compare majors, compare jobs, compare lifestyles, and once even joked that Stella and I were an odd pairing. Stella laughed along. I pretended it didn't sting. Still, none of this outweighed the good memories. Movie nights on my couch, road trips with bad playlists, care packages when I caught the flu, the way she cried on my shoulder after her first major heartbreak, the way she celebrated my small wins, at least outwardly. I held on to those moments like anchors, believing they defined us more than the sharp edges I tried to ignore. That's the thing about loyalty. You don't see the cracks until your hands are already bleeding from holding on too tight. The weeks leading up to her graduation were deceptively normal. We texted, we shared memes, she complained about her final project. I congratulated her when she said it was done. I expected she'd tell me the ceremony date when things settled. I didn't push. I didn't want to seem intrusive. On the night before the ceremony, the night I didn't know was the night before, Stella called me briefly to vent about stress. Nothing unusual. She sounded tired, but calm. She thanked me for always being there. I told her I was proud of her. We hung up with our usual, "Talk tomorrow." Tomorrow came, and she didn't. Instead, I woke early, opened my phone, and walked straight into a truth that had been building quietly for years. And in that moment, Everything I thought I knew about my life, my friendship, my place in her world shifted under my feet.
The morning I discovered the truth didn't feel dramatic. It wasn't stormy. Nothing crashed to the floor. No instinct warned me that my world was about to tilt. It was just a quiet morning, sunlight slipping through my blinds, the kind of morning where you stretch slowly and imagine a peaceful day ahead. I made coffee, sat on my couch, and opened my phone the way people do, absently, without intention. And there it was. Stella, in a black graduation gown, standing on the university steps, the degree she had cried over and worked for clutched proudly in her hands. Her caption read, "The biggest day of my life, the beginning of everything, grateful for everyone who supported me along the way." Everyone. It's a small word, but my breath caught on it. I stared at that photo the way you stare at incoming disaster, frozen, unable to process the impact until it hits. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion so deep it felt like vertigo. I blinked, scrolled, clicked her profile, looked for more. Maybe this was a photo shoot. Maybe they staged it early. Maybe... No. The comments confirmed it. Beautiful ceremony. So proud of you today. You looked stunning walking across that stage. Each word piled on top of me like rubble. I checked my messages, scrolling back through days of conversations that suddenly felt stranger than fiction. Stella had texted me the night before, complaining about stress, but omitting the one detail I should have known, that she would be graduating in the morning. She had every opportunity, but she said nothing. It wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. I put my phone down, then picked it up again, as though repetition would change what I saw. My hands were shaking in a way I didn't recognize. My chest felt tight, a physical ache blooming beneath my ribs. Memories flashed. Times I'd reassured her, comforted her, celebrated her milestones, carried her fear when she didn't have the strength to. And now she had crossed the finish line without even looking back. I whispered aloud, "Why wasn't I there?" The room swallowed the question. I replayed our last call. Her calm voice. The way she thanked me. The way she said, "Talk tomorrow," with a softness I thought meant something. Now it sounded rehearsed, almost guilty. Part of me wanted to rationalize her choice. Maybe there were limited seats. Maybe things were chaotic. Maybe she assumed I had work. I grabbed onto those excuses like lifelines, desperate to keep myself afloat. But as I looked at the photos again, wide group shots, smiling faces, at least 15 people present, those excuses dissolved. There was room. There was time. There was opportunity. There just wasn't intention. And intention is everything. Hours passed before Stella messaged me. Not to tell me about the ceremony, but to send a casual meme. No mention of the graduation, no acknowledgement of the entire world she lived that day without me. I stared at the message, my breath shallow. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was avoidance. I typed, "You graduated today." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, returned, vanished again. When her reply finally came, it read, "Oh, yeah, it was super last minute. Sorry, it slipped my mind." Slipped my mind. 12 years. Daily conversations. Night before phone calls. And she said it slipped her mind. I felt something crack inside me. Not a dramatic shatter, but a quiet, final fracture that can't be undone. Her message wasn't just a lie, it was an insult wrapped in indifference. She didn't even bother to create a convincing excuse. I responded only with congratulations. Nothing more. She replied with a heart emoji. A heart. The same symbol people use for pizza photos and pet videos. That was the moment my grief shifted into something sharper. Not rage, not bitterness, just clarity. A clean, precise understanding that I had been holding on to a version of our friendship that no longer existed, maybe never fully existed, in the way I believed. Later that evening, as more photos surfaced, group dinner shots, toasts, her mother hugging her, Mia draping an arm around her shoulders, I noticed something else. Stella's smile was bright, but her eyes, they never drifted toward the camera like she was searching for someone missing. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look conflicted. She looked complete. She didn't need me there. She didn't want me there. That was the truth. I sat on my couch, the apartment silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, and let the realization settle. I wasn't blindsided by a sudden betrayal. I was waking up to a truth that had been whispering for years. I had been loyal to someone who saw me as optional. In that quiet understanding, before the anger, before the clarity, before the plan, there was heartbreak. The kind that makes you reevaluate every memory. The kind that demands an answer even when you know the answer will hurt. But heartbreak is also an opening. Because the moment you realize someone has chosen to remove you from their life, you begin to imagine what life looks like without them.
In the days after Stella's graduation, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once. It was subtle. Like the moment your eyes adjust to a dark room and shadows sharpen into shapes you didn't want to see. I didn't wake up and decide to investigate her motives. It happened naturally, almost involuntarily, as if my mind had been gathering evidence long before my heart was ready to acknowledge it. The first sign was the silence. Stella, who normally called me 3 times a day, suddenly vanished into vague messages and late replies. I told myself she was busy celebrating, visiting family, catching up on rest. But the silence stretched too long and too deliberately. I knew her patterns. I knew her rhythms. I knew when something didn't align. The second sign came through a small detail, something most people wouldn't notice. While scrolling through her graduation photos again, I looked closely at a picture taken inside the venue. On the wall behind her, there was a poster listing the ceremony times. Her program wasn't last minute. It had been scheduled for weeks. Anyone attending would have known it. And yet she told me she found out the night before. The contradiction tightened something in my chest. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I quietly paid attention. The third sign came through a mutual acquaintance, someone I rarely spoke to but had on social media. She posted a short video from the ceremony. I watched Stella walking across the stage with confidence, her family cheering loudly behind her. Then I heard a familiar voice off camera. Mia. I'm so glad she cut off those distractions. Now she can focus. Distractions. The word felt like a sting to the face. It hung in the air, colder than the rest of the audio. I replayed it 3 times. She wasn't talking about enemies. She wasn't talking about obligations. She was talking about people. People Stella supposedly outgrew. People like me. That was when the thread truly started to unravel. I began rereading old messages. Slowly at first, then obsessively. Not looking for drama, looking for patterns. I noticed how often I initiated conversations, how often I offered support, how often she redirected attention to herself, how often she used phrases like, "You always understand me," or "I don't know what I'd do about you," as if my role was to absorb her storms rather than stand beside her in the sunlight. I realized that for the past year she rarely asked about my day unless it related to her somehow. I had confused familiarity with intimacy, routine with reciprocity. The fourth sign came from something even smaller. My birthday, 3 weeks prior. She gave me a generic candle and forgot the card. I had brushed it off. Now, looking at the elaborate, personalized gifts she gave others, the oversight felt like a warning I had ignored. The fifth sign came from Diane, Stella's mother. I ran into her at the supermarket, entirely by accident. She looked surprised to see me, then almost uncomfortable. "Oh, Amelia," she said, polite, but cool as always. "How have you been?" "Fine," I answered. "And Stella?" Her smile tightened. "She's doing wonderfully. She's finally surrounded by people who elevate her. It's what she deserves." Elevate her? The implication was unmistakable. When I walked away, my body felt light, almost shaky, like the ground beneath me was shifting. That night, sitting at my desk, with my journal open, I began documenting everything. Each sign, each shift, each strange moment that had resurfaced in my mind. As I wrote, patterns formed. Patterns I couldn't ignore anymore. The sixth sign didn't come from outside. It came from memory. A moment from months earlier that I'd buried. We were at her apartment, eating takeout, and she had mentioned in passing, "Sometimes I think you're too available, like you don't have enough going on." She said it lightly, casually, with a smile. I laughed it off. Now, revisiting it, I understood the truth behind her tone. Stella was not simply drifting. She was elevating herself by diminishing me. The seventh sign came unexpectedly. I opened an old folder on my laptop, one filled with screenshots I'd taken long ago. Notes from times when she canceled plans last minute. Messages where she forgot things that mattered to me. Photos from events she invited everyone else to, except me. Little gatherings I didn't question because she always had excuses. Seeing them now, side by side, clarity spread through me like a slow burn. It wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a pattern of selective loyalty. And I had never been on the selected side. The final sign, the one that solidified everything, came from a voicemail. One that I didn't expect. Stella had sent it months earlier after an argument with Mia. I'd saved it. Unintentionally. In it, she sounded frustrated. She said, "Mia thinks you hold me back. She doesn't get that you're comfortable. You're stable. You don't need ambition like we do." We. Not us. We. Her and Mia. Her and her new circle. Her and the world she built without me. My role wasn't friend. It was placeholder. And the moment she found what she believed was a better option, she quietly replaced me. No confrontation, no conversation. Just erasure. That realization didn't ignite rage. It didn't send me spiraling. It brought something much more calm, much more dangerous. Understanding. Understanding of who she was. Understanding of who I had been to her. Understanding of what had really happened on that stage. She didn't forget me. She chose a version of her life that didn't include me. And once I accepted that truth, the question quietly shifted from why did she do it to something sharper, cleaner, steadier. What am I going to do about it?
I replayed Stella's voicemail 3 times before I could breathe without shaking. Her voice, so calm, so casual, floated through my apartment like a confirmation I never asked for. I just didn't want Amelia in the photos. She doesn't fit the aesthetic. Mom said it would throw off the whole look. And honestly, she's been too clingy lately. The final line stung the most. I just needed the day to be about me. As if 12 years of loyalty had somehow threatened her spotlight. When the voicemail ended, an unexpected clarity settled over me. Not rage, not despair. Something quieter, steadier, like finally seeing a room with the lights on after stumbling in the dark for years. I realized Stella had done me a favor, not by excluding me, but by revealing herself without disguise. I sat at my small kitchen table, opened my journal, and wrote one sentence. My revenge will be the truth she never thought I'd tell. My plan came together in layers, not from vindictiveness, but from understanding. Stella curated an image, perfect, admired, envied. Everything she did, every relationship she maintained, existed to support that image. So I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to remove my silence. Let the truth breathe. Sometimes honesty is louder than confrontation. The first step was documentation. As someone who journals every night, I already had years of memories, dates, conversations, little slights I dismissed to keep the peace. I began combing through those old entries, highlighting every moment where Stella subtly distanced herself or used me for emotional labor without offering any in return. Patterns emerged quickly. But I didn't want a case built on bitterness. I wanted one built on facts. So I compiled a timeline. Messages she ignored, events she downplayed, apologies she never returned. No embellishments, just the truth. The voicemail became the centerpiece. I saved it 3 times in the cloud, on a flash drive, and emailed it to myself.
I replayed it until I understood not just Stella's words, but the shape of her intentions. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't conflicted. She was simply prioritizing her image over my humanity. The second step was conversation. Controlled, purposeful conversation. Jared, my coworker, had been watching me unravel quietly over the past week. I trusted him enough to share the voicemail, not for gossip, but to hear from someone outside my emotional storm. He listened, eyebrows knitted in disbelief, then said something that anchored my resolve. If she cares more about a photo than a decade of friendship, imagine what else she's been willing to hide. His voice wasn't angry, it was disappointed. That made it feel even more real. Mrs. Langford, my elderly neighbor, provided the compassion I didn't know I needed. When I told her how Stella referred to me as clashing with the aesthetic, she touched my hand and whispered, "People who depend on illusions fear those who know their truth." I wrote that down too. Her wisdom helped me shape the emotional compass of my plan. The third step was exposure. Not public humiliation, not drama, but measured revelation. Stella crafted her life like a highlight reel, and she expected everyone around her to protect that reel, so I decided I would no longer play along. The first part of this exposure was subtle. I created a digital folder titled Foreclosure. Inside, I placed the voicemail, screenshots of key messages, and selected journal entries. My intention wasn't to leak them. It was to prepare a document I could share if Stella denied her actions or tried to twist the narrative. I wanted to be ready to defend myself, not attack her. But a quiet, strategic idea formed as I organized the files. A message, sent privately, to the people whose opinions she valued most. Her mother Diane and her cousin Mia. They were the ones whose approval she chased. The same ones who apparently said I would ruin the aesthetic. These were the voices that shaped her cruelty. So instead of confronting Stella directly, I drafted a calm, concise message to them. No anger. No accusations. Simply the truth paired with Stella's own words. A mirror, held gently. Before sending anything, I rehearsed the emotional tone. I didn't want to sound wounded or vindictive. I wanted to sound clear, steady. I even recorded myself reading the message out loud until it carried the exact weight I intended, dignity without bitterness. The fourth step was silence. Strategic silence. I stopped initiating conversations. I stopped liking her posts. I stopped showing up as the dependable friend she expected me to be. I knew Stella well enough to anticipate her panic. People like her depend on proximity. They need witnesses to admire them. My absence would say more than any angry confrontation ever could. Exactly as predicted, Stella reached out 2 days later. Not to apologize, but to ask, "Hey, are we okay? You've been distant." I didn't respond. Not yet. My plan depended on her feeling the imbalance she created. The final step was delivery. On a quiet Thursday morning, with sunlight spilling across my desk, I sent the message to her mother and cousin. Attached was the voicemail. No explanation, no commentary. Just Stella's truth, unedited. I ended my note with one sentence. I wanted you to hear how I was spoken about before I decide how to move forward. Then I waited. Not for chaos, not for Stella's world to collapse, but for the moment she realized that the image she protected so fiercely had been pierced not by lies, by the words she chose when she thought I'd never hear them. My revenge wasn't fire. It was light, the kind that reveals, slowly and inevitably. What was always there? Silence has a weight to it, heavy, deliberate, unmistakable. After I sent the message to Diane and Mia, I didn't wait for their replies. I didn't refresh my inbox or stare at my phone. Instead, I went about my day with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks, almost as if regaining my voice had returned oxygen to my lungs. Revenge, I realized, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was the quiet removal of your presence from someone who assumed you'd always be there. The first ripple arrived that evening. My phone vibrated with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. Moments later, a text followed. "Amelia, this is Mia. I think we should talk." I didn't reply. She wasn't the one I needed anything from. Their discomfort wasn't my responsibility. What mattered was that the people Stella tried so hard to impress had heard her unfiltered words, and they were now wrestling with them. By morning, there were 3 missed calls from Stella's mother. I ignored those too. I wasn't being cruel. I simply wasn't their cleanup crew anymore. The real impact came when Stella finally called. Not once, 6 times. I didn't pick up. On the 7th attempt, she sent a message. "Amelia, what did you do?" The phrasing was telling. Not, "Why are you hurt?" or "Can we talk?" Her panic wasn't about my feelings. It was about her exposure. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel obligated to soothe her. By the afternoon, she showed up at my apartment building. I watched her through the peephole, hair perfectly styled, makeup untouched despite the tension in her posture. She knocked twice, then spoke to the door with a forced calm. "I know you're in there. Please, can we talk? I just want to explain." I let silence answer for me. The truth is, I didn't need her apology. Not anymore. I had outgrown the version of myself who begged for scraps of consideration. She knocked again, harder. "You didn't have to involve my family. That was low, Amelia." Her voice cracked, betraying the control she clung to. But I stayed still, steady, present only for myself. For a long stretch of silence, I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway. That moment didn't feel triumphant. It felt clarifying. The dynamic had shifted, not because I hurt her, but because I stopped letting her define the terms of our friendship. The next day, I learned that the voicemail had ignited tension within her family. Not explosive, but enough to fracture the polished image they collectively maintained. Jared overheard Mia at the cafe near our office, saying, "If she talks about her friends like that, imagine what she says about us." That single line told me everything I needed to know. Stella's curated world wasn't collapsing, but it was cracking. And not because of anything I fabricated, only the truth. My part in that truth was finished, but my revenge wasn't about breaking her. It was about rebuilding myself. So I took the next step. I began gently reclaiming the spaces where I had once shrunk myself for her comfort. It began on social media. I never posted much, mostly because Stella dominated those spaces and I preferred staying low. But now I uploaded a single, simple post, a photo of the sunset from my balcony, with a caption that read, "Learning that someone's silence about you says more than your loyalty ever did." No names, no anger, but people who knew us understood. The comments were supportive, reflective, not dramatic. I appreciated the quiet solidarity. What mattered most was that the narrative was no longer hers to control. A few days later, Stella finally sent a lengthy message. Not an apology, never that. More of a justification woven with subtle accusations. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but you've been so sensitive lately. I didn't invite you because the ceremony was small and I didn't want any tension. You know how my family is. I wish you had talked to me instead of making things messy." There it was. The familiar twist, the gentle gaslighting, the attempt to reframe her choice as my flaw. This time, I didn't argue, I didn't justify, I didn't defend myself. I replied with 11 words. I heard what you said when you thought I wouldn't. No explanation, no anger, just truth. She typed and typed and typed, then stopped. No reply ever came. And that was the real shift. She had no script for a version of me she couldn't manipulate. In the quiet that followed, I realized the real revenge had already taken shape, not from what I exposed, but from what I refused to be anymore. I had taken back my emotional territory. Stella could no longer rely on my silence to preserve her image. The final layer of the plan unfolded naturally. Word spread, not from me, but through her family, through mutual acquaintances, through the subtle ripples of her own actions catching up to her. People didn't turn against her. They simply saw her more clearly, and clarity was enough. Weeks later, I ran into her at the grocery store. She froze. Her mother beside her gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile, one that acknowledged everything without saying a word. Stella looked like someone who had rehearsed 100 different confrontations but couldn't use any of them. I nodded politely and walked past. That small, graceful exit, that was the culmination of my revenge. Because in the end, I didn't destroy Stella's world. I simply stepped out of the version of it she forced me to live in.
The first morning, after everything settled, I woke up to sunlight spilling softly across my apartment. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I didn't scroll through feeds. I didn't replay Stella's voicemail. I didn't worry about how she or anyone else would react. I simply sat, journal open, and wrote, "I am still here and I am enough." It felt like exhaling after holding my breath underwater. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost mundane in their normalcy, but every small choice felt charged with freedom. I returned to the routines I had neglected: morning coffee walks, catching up with Mrs. Linksford, baking simple bread at my kitchen counter, journaling without urgency or grief. These acts, small and unremarkable, became rituals of self-reclamation. I realized that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about restoration, restoring dignity, restoring boundaries, and restoring a sense of control that betrayal had stolen. I began to notice subtle changes in how people interacted with me. Colleagues and neighbors, those who had quietly watched Stella's polished persona dominate our social circles, now approached me differently. They didn't ask for explanations. They simply treated me as someone whose integrity had been quietly asserted, whose voice had finally been heard. The truth has a gravity of its own, and I could feel it ripple outward without me lifting a finger in anger. The hardest but most important lesson came from reflection. Betrayal had felt like the end of a relationship I cherished, but in reality, it was a turning point. I had allowed myself to be defined by someone else's values, someone else's image for too long. Once I removed myself from that dynamic, clarity emerged. I learned that revenge need not be violent or humiliating. Sometimes it is enough to live deliberately, truthfully, and without apology. To remove your consent from the narrative someone else has written for you, that is the kind of justice that sticks. Even Stella, who at once seemed untouchable in her curated world, became smaller in my memory. Not because I diminished her, but because I no longer granted her power over me. My focus shifted inward, toward growth, toward self-respect, toward the life I wanted, rather than the reflection of someone else's approval. I often return to that moment. The voicemail, the exclusion, the silence afterward, and smile quietly. Not with triumph over her, but with gratitude for the clarity it forced me to find. I am not bitter. I am steady.
I am present, I am free. And as I close my journal each night, I write the truth I no longer need to prove to anyone. The quietest revenge is living your life on your own terms.